the most powerful enemies.
Goku, whatever you've got planned, now's the time to spring it.
The strongest heroes.
Kai!
The biggest fights.
I'm Naruto Uzumaki, don't forget it!
All come together in one place. Hulu is the home to Naruto Shippuden, Bleach 1000-Year Blood War, Dragon Ball Z Kai, and more of your favorite anime. Find your anime on Hulu's Animehem, your anime destination.
Welcome to Dynamic Duos. I'm Tiffany Crivelli. Today, we'll be joined by Wes Craig and Drew Craig, which makes this episode a unique one because our guests aren't just colleagues or friends, they're brothers. Now, you may recognize Wes from his artistic work on the Rick Remender series Deadly Class, or perhaps from his work on his new series Kaya. And you may know Drew from his debut series The Savage Strength of Starstorm, which he's been writing and drawing. Wes and Drew Craig grew up in the 80s and 90s, both lovers of comics from a very young age. And now they both have creator-owned series at Image Comics. They've been talking about comics as fans and members of the industry for years. So join us as they let us listen in on the sort of conversation that they've been having all of their lives on this episode of Dynamic Duos.
Hello.
Hello, Wes Craig.
Hello, Drew Craig. How you doing? We're going to do our best to imitate the one of the 10,000 conversations we've had over the course of our lives talking about comic books and stuff. So hopefully people find that entertaining. It'll be like being in the car with us when we're driving to a convention back in the day or flight or whatever we do, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully there's no awkward silences or we can keep this conversation rolling. But yeah, hopefully it's entertaining for you guys. It's going to be entertaining for us. So
yeah, we always manage to entertain each other. When we have like dinner together at our parents' place, it's like my mom looks at us like, how are you still able to talk? How do you have anything left to talk about with comics and stuff? And it's like, just never.
Well, there's always something to talk about. There's always something new out there, something interesting, right? So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I've said this. I've been in the business a bit longer, so I've had a few of these questions asked. How did you get into comic books? But I've never heard. I've heard you personally tell me, and I've experienced how you got into comic books. But what got you into comic books at the beginning when you were a little kid, Drew Craig?
Well, growing up in the '80s, it was the thing on the block. It was like everybody who was cool collected comic books, you know. So I mean, you're a witness to that. Like all the cool dudes, all the guys who skateboarded, all the guys who played street hockey, they were all collecting comic books as well. And everybody had a collection. And we come from the West Island of Quebec. And there was several comic book stores in the area growing up. So unfortunately, there's not really any anymore, which is sort of a sad thing. I always thought that it would be cool if me and Wes would open one up, and maybe we'll do that down the road one day. But anyways, just growing up was like everybody loved comic books. It was just the thing in the 80s. And, you know, it was like it was a heyday for comic books, you know. So and then, so, I mean, there was the faction that loved DC and there was the faction that loved Marvel, and they didn't get along with each other. And then they'd have gang fights in the middle of the street. And then usually the Marvel guys would come out on top. But sometimes the DC guys would get in there, get their shots in. But no, it was just, it was just the thing. And, you know, we grew up with our mom was always painting and drawing. So like, I mean, I remember even before that, we lived in a separate part of Quebec, the South Shore. And I'd get my dad to buy us comic books, and they were in French. I just always loved it. I just loved the art and the stories and the characters. And it's just, it never stopped. It never ended. So that's how I got into comic books originally. And then, you know, we'd have like, with our friends, we're all into it, and we'd get like little comic book groups together and collect comic books and talk about comic books and draw and write stories and stuff. And then, that's it. I mean, it was just always a thing, you know, so.
Yeah, it's interesting. We kind of came at a good time where, like, I remember the kids that I feel like my memory of it was like, we were like into the superhero stuff, but the kids that read comic books that were like not like super nerds about it, they were into like the military type stuff, you know, like Punisher, G.I. Joe, like it was more like the non-superhero thing where they were into like guns and, just like Rambo type stuff,
Yeah.
that era. And then there was the real like comic book nerds that they were more like us that were more into, Spider-Man, and I was
Yeah.
into Teen Titans and
Yeah, the
Arena,
hardcore guys were like more into like the more not indie stuff, but like the Vertigo titles and like the more,
Yeah, there's
they
that
loved,
sort of,
yeah,
yeah.
they were really, like the Eddie Munson guys were like really into like the darker stuff, like Checkmate and all these mostly DC. They were more into DC, I found, and then like the guys who were like more like the cooler dudes were kind of more into Marvel, I found back then, So I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was like
it was
the darker
X-Men
guys.
was, like,
Sorry, go ahead.
just X-Men was cool. Like when we
Yeah,
were kids, it was very cool. Like it's always like for us, it was like that was like the biggest comic in the world was
yeah,
like X-Men at a certain point. Like
yeah.
you
That
put the X on there, it's guaranteed that it's going to do well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That was my
yeah, it's
favorite.
interesting. Like and also like we had the thing where we grew up and we had these previous generations of like superheroes and stuff, but then we were the perfect age where like Image came along, who we both we're both with right now, and it's a little bit, that's what's so surreal about it, is that the original Image lineup of Spawn and Wildcats and Savage Dragon and Youngblood and all this stuff, it kind of came at like we were, I don't know, I forget exactly how old I was, but I feel like I was maybe 13, 12. I'm
Yeah,
not sure,
I was
but
like
around that
yeah,
early teens is like perfect age to read that stuff and have a new, this is your superhero world, not like this previous superhero world that we were reading.
yeah. Well, I mean, the first big thought that I had growing up was like when I remember like thinking you can draw comic books for a living, and that was like wow, like that would be amazing, if we could do that, or I could do that, and
Yeah.
then not realizing that was a thing you could actually even do, and then getting into like being Canadian and realizing that some of the big guys in the industry were Canadian, and then just wow,
Mhm.
that's awesome, so like we're not so secluded, we could actually do this living in Canada, so
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I mentioned that I was on a panel, another surreal experience that happened to me. I was on a panel. You were there with Mirka and Dolfo and Todd McFarlane. And it was like crazy to me because I was like, I used to try to draw like this guy. And when I found out that he was Canadian, it's like that was a thing where it's like, oh, you can be, it made it a bit more real for us, I guess, that it's like a possibility. And this guy was like top of the heap at the time, and he came in and he said the same thing when he realized that John Byrne lived in Canada and stuff. Like when he talked on the panel with me, it's like that was the same light bulb for him, that he realized he didn't have to be this guy born and raised in New York City and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, John Byrne was the first guy where I was like, "Oh, wow, this guy's Canadian." And he was like, growing up when I was young, he was pretty much he was my guy. I know your guys were like George Perez and Marv Wolfman, and John Byrne was like my dude. And those are the first guys that really, I think, inspired us both. I think I would look at your Teen Titans and I was like, these guys are amazing as well. And yeah, those were the dudes like that. We both like kind of like inspired us, and we wanted to be like those guys, right? So
yeah, where you notice the creator's name, and then you're picking up anything that they do with their name on it, not just picking up characters. And I remember Teen Titans was the comic that made me want to dig back. It's like I got issue, I don't know, 17, 18 or something like that. And I wanted to find the earlier, I couldn't find them really, but I wanted to find the earlier issues to fill in, turn you into a full on collector nerd where you're like, I have to complete my collection, all that stuff.
I remember we had like a comic book store in the West Island called Captain Quebec. And there were several comic book stores, but that was like the big one. It still exists. It's still on St. Catharines in Montreal. And,
but they used to have like multiple locations, and now they have like the one. Right?
Yeah, they had two or three locations at one point. I think they had Anyways, so and like it was like a big event if we got to go to Captain Quebec to buy comic books. But my dad was like, he didn't understand that like comics went up in value, so he wasn't ready to pay like $5-6 for a comic book. He thought that was ridiculous. So we'd always get like these comic books, or what was the imprint? I forget, but it was like we'd get the Shield, and
it was that Archie line of like like the Fox and the Comet and all that stuff.
That's right.
They were cheaper newsprint, I guess. I don't know what it was, but he saw that price tag. That's why we got the French comics, I think, is that he saw a big black and white comic that was printed on black and white paper, and there was like, it was pretty thick because there was a bunch of old stories in there. I bet you it was like 50 cents rather than like, $2 or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he couldn't wrap his head around it. It was ridiculous. We wanted like the old Teen Titans, like they were like, $10. He's like, I'm paying $10 for a comic book. That's crazy. But I'm glad that he got us those ones because it like, broadened our, our knowledge of comic books, and those comics were kind of cool too, so
they were, just looking at the visuals, and there was weird, I remember there would be, there'd be a Thor thing, but then there'd be a weird, Red Sonja or Conan or whatever, John, an old Buscema or, old stuff that wasn't around when we were growing up. It was like the late 70s rather than the mid 80s, So, no, it was good. I still remember all those weird ads, and it just kind of, gave us a different perspective on those things.
Yeah. So that was cool. And then I remember in high school, there was a comic book store that was basically walking distance from my high school. Yeah. So, like we were talking about Todd McFarlane when it was on Spider-Man, I used to get so stoked for Wednesday, just to walk to the store and the new comic books were out. And especially for Spider-Man, I was like such a big fan, and same thing, like tried to draw like him and everything. And that was like, even like, we're in Quebec, so the winters would be nasty, but I'd put on my long johns and I'd trek through the snow, and I'd still go. I wouldn't eat lunch. I'd save all my lunch money and spend it all on comic books, So I
remember getting those we'd get like those ice cream bars, and I would eat that for lunch because they were, I don't even know, like $1 or whatever, and I had $3 or $4 or $5 for lunch, I guess. So it's like the rest of this is going to comics,
Yeah. So he was very lean in high school, very skinny. Fast and skinny, running through the snow and
with a pile of comic books under your arm.
Yeah. Now I'm not so much. I'm sitting around drawing all the time, so I'm not so fast and not so skinny anymore.
It's I remember that place, DG Comics. I remember seeing my first like Adam Hughes on Justice League there, and like first time I saw Mobius for the first time there when they had these epic collections, and the picture that I saw, it's like it burned into some of those images like burn in my mind. And recently I found that image again, and I scanned it in, and I sent it to the printer so I could get like this like larger than average like giant poster, and now that's sitting in my office. Like that's how much those things kind of burn into your mind. I think we saw Dark Knight Returns there. Maybe that was the place where we first saw that. A lot of firsts there. It was a small little shop, but it had like, when you're a kid, it seems like.
I got the Killing Joke there, and the guy, it was the guy Dave. He worked. It was his comic book store, and he was like, "All right, I'm selling this to you, but I'm not supposed to be selling it to you. It's a little intense." He's like, "Are you ready for it?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then I read it, and I was like, "I don't know if I'm ready for this."
I tell people now, like when they come up and say, "Is this like, can you read?" Like my, right now I'm doing Kaya, and that's pretty much not all ages, but it's not, it's not written in a way where it's going to like scar anybody. But my previous comic is Deadly Class. And some people come up as, "Can my kid read this?" And I say, "How old are they?" And I'm like, a little bit too young, but at the same time, everybody, I saw that one issue of Faust that you had when I was little, and it was gnarly, and like, when I saw Dark Knight Returns and seeing him kiss Catwoman when she's like an old prostitute, and like seeing the Joker like snap his own neck in that, and seeing the realistic style of Killing Joke with everything that happens to Batgirl, it's like, definitely. Everybody sees that before they're ready, Yeah,
the Killing Joke was the first one where I was like, whoa, this is like seriously intense. And then Faust was because I was playing baseball with some dudes, and one of the guys was an artist as well. So I was talking about, we got into comic books, and he was like, Tim Vigil is the man, like he was a huge Tim Vigil fan. And he was like, "Go pick up Faust." And I'm like, "All right, cool." So I went and picked it up, and then I was reading it. I was like, "Oh man, this is not what this is more intense than I expected." And then I went back, and he was like, "So did you read it?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty intense, but the art is awesome. He's a great artist."
I mean, he was giving it for sure.
Oh man, yeah.
What he was putting on the page, but I was not ready for that amount.
We had to hide it.
What it is. That amount of many things, but I don't know. I don't want kids to listen to this and hear too much nastiness. But it was rough. But that happens to everybody, and I think it's like afterwards we went through our bad kid phase. But at that point we were very like innocent, we were just like
You got corrupted by comic books.
they
were right.
A little bit. It does corrupt you a little bit, because that's the thing too. When we went to comic shops, it was everything. It was like there's like hardcore stuff. There's like porn comics there, but there's also reprints of like Will Eisner's The Spirit stuff coming over from Japan, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and you know what I mean. Like there was just like so many different ways you could go. And I think before that, the previous decade, there weren't comic shops, so it was really like all you would see is you'd go to the corner store and you'd see Superman and Batman and Spider-Man, and that was it. Like that's the only options. But we came up when comic shops were like a thriving thing where you could find it in the suburbs.
Yeah, there was also a TV show that was on called Prisoners of Gravity on TV Ontario, and that kind of clued me into like a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't have picked up if it wasn't for that show. It was you know, it was on on TV Ontario, and it was like so I mean I learned about Akira from that show. I mean, multiple things. I got into Doctor Who from that show. And there was so much, like they always have artists. They had Dave Gibbons on it. They had Alan Moore. They had, you know, all these great artists and writers. And I mean, it was a really great show. You can still see them on YouTube actually. So Prisoners of Gravity, if you want to watch some old school comic book stuff. It was a cool show. There was a lot of stuff. It's hard to remember everything but it clued me into like a lot of things. You know, it turned me on to a lot of things. So. And then both of us, right? So,
well, I watch that too once in a while when I'm drawing and stuff, and it's like just remembering. It's such a of the era, like it's so dorky, like in a lot, like I don't think people understand like how dorky and how like that's the way it was in the '80s, like Star Trek fandom, and you know, but it was crazy. I remember seeing Alan Moore for the first time on that thing because you know he stands out because he was so loud looking at the time. Super, you know, just kind of cool.
Frank Miller and like everybody.
George R.R. Martin actually is on one of those old episodes.
Yeah,
like before you know, way
way before
it became a TV show. He was writing that stuff, but not nearly at that level yet. Yeah, it's true. I love all that old stuff, man. I do go through nostalgic kicks where I watch some of that stuff, and some of it's like hard to watch a little bit because it's just. There's a lot of awkward dudes trying to find their way through the world, you know. That's what.
Yeah, well, I love it because it's like it brings me back to an innocent time, you know. And I watch it, and it like kind of reminds me why I love this stuff so much, you know. Like it's like you know. And then sometimes you forget about interviews that they did, and you're like, oh, you know, like they got Dave Gibbons on today. They got, you know, it's. Yeah, it was. I mean, it's, you know, it was. I used to look forward to that show all the time. I used to record it on VHS and watch it over, and you know, like so it was a neat show. It's not something that everybody saw, you know. It wasn't a big show. It was like you know, I don't even know if it was on in the States, maybe in a couple
apparently it was, but you know, the way it was back then on select, you know, in select markets or whatever. So it's like tons of people didn't see it. Some strange things. Apparently they played on Sci-Fi. That's what I've heard, like in the American channel.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe years later, I don't even know.
Yeah.
But that was that's funny stuff, man.
Yeah, you were talking about like trying to make Kaya for like accessible to like younger kids and stuff, and that was sort of a dilemma I had with Starstorm because I was like, I want kids to be able to read this, but I also want to be able to swear. So I'm like, because I want. You know, I figured I could use the, you know, the different, you know, symbols for swearing, but I said, I just want to be able to say shit sometimes, you know, like, and just have me say it, you know. So that was my only little problem, but that can be a bit of an issue because you want to be able to do what you want, but so you don't want to be like held to like not being able to, you know, tell certain stories and like cut things out. You know, I don't want to be edit the stories down too much, but I also want kids to be able to enjoy a new superhero and stuff like that. So I was having a little bit of a back and forth with that, and I decided, well, whatever, I'll just let them say shit, and that's, you know, but I won't go further than that. You know what I mean?
So. It goes heavier, yeah. Well, I mean, like it's such a funny thing because it's like the amount. Swearing is like bad, but it's like they're just words. It's so silly. They're just like a different form of. There's a proper version of that word and a bad version, but like, well, who cares really? It's not going to make it worse. We can show every comic, every TV show has tons of violence, and it's that's fine. But then but don't show any sex.
Correct.
You know, it's weird. It's
Yeah.
weird the way that people's kind of
Well, there's always
really,
ways around it, right? There's always
yeah,
like,
yeah,
innuendo and whatnot, I mean, even, when you're young, and I remember like I was reading books, I was like, I didn't know that characters were, you know, getting it on, so I was
yeah,
like, oh, and then a couple years later, I'm like, oh, that's what they were doing.
yeah. I mean, that's a good way of doing it. Is this Pixar kind of way of dealing with it, where there's
Yeah.
jokes that are for the adults and jokes that are for the kids, and like you kind of play up to both sides a little bit depending on what you want. But yeah, it's true, because it's like Kaya's like an adventure where there's knives, swords, and axes and all kinds. It's fantasy stuff, so it's like, well, how is no one ever going to get hurt in this world?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, there's just ways of showing it. I'm just trying not to be, violence
Yeah.
happens, but just don't be graphic with it. You don't need
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can imply things, and just like, I mean, Bambi, like it's always been a way. Terrible things have been in children's entertainment. It's just, how do you portray it? You don't just try to scar them, but
Yeah.
shield them from everything is not a good idea either.
No,
And
yeah, for
I
sure.
think the two things I liked the most when I was a kid were Teen Titans and Robotech, and I think it's because it was looking at stuff that was maybe 2 or 3 years above me.
Mm.
And now I can't read it now because it's made or watch Robotech now because it's made for kids. But like, at the time, I always felt like, oh, they're not treating me like a kid, so like, I
Right.
think that's important. That's a good feeling when you're a little 10, 11, 12-year-old, where you think you're reading something that's more for like a 15-year-old or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, who are your most inspirational creators growing up? I know who they were, but for the peoples, all five of them.
We're rehashing a few of our previous conversations,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I think like the first people, like I said, that I went digging through, looking back on their stuff, was Marv Wolfman and George Perez on Teen Titans. And I'm not sure what that sound was, but what else? I think like, I'm trying to think of who else was like I really got into. I mean, I loved, Todd McFarlane was a big deal, but I also, man, I loved like Masamune Shiro on like Ghost in the Shell. Like, I think about it now, I didn't try to draw like that because I thought it was impossible, but I mean, I thought it was so cool looking. Now when I go through Ghost in the Shell, I'm like, I remember this image, these lines, like I just thought they were so cool looking, but it's kind of all over the place. Like Frank Miller is a big one for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think it occurred to me when I was a little kid. I didn't get it. It's like, because at the time Dark Knight Returns, it seemed so like kind of ugly in a way. Which I still think in a way, but now it's like got a charm to it. But I mean, remember like a few years later, I thought Sin City was like the coolest thing ever. And like,
yeah, I thought just the storytelling when I read it was like, wow, this is just beyond anything that I've read before, so it was, that was the thing about it.
Yeah, you could see he was doing stuff where like he's got this 4x4 grid, and how I still to this day, like I look back at old comics and I go, this doesn't read well anymore, because it shouldn't. I'm an older man now. I've read other stuff. I thought it was cool when I was a kid. You can't necessarily go back to that stuff. But like, I just, for the first time relatively recently, I read Born Again with Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli on Daredevil, and I'm like, I recommend. I was like, wait, check it out again. Like, it's like, this is still good. Like, it's still a good read.
Yeah, you lent it to me. I was like,
an adult, and it's still really cool.
Yeah, they're awesome.
It was year one, so it's like, I feel like those do stand the test of time. Sin City, I've read a few where I'm like, some of these are awesome, some of these are he's getting a little weird in some of them, but he had a good decade for us of just amazing.
Yeah, Born Again is really great. Like, still a great read for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were kids, like, you were really sort of we grew up when I was young, when we were both young and we lived in the South Shore, there was Goldorak, right, which was like our first introduction to anime, right? So I mean, but I didn't realize it was anime. It was all in French, so I thought it was a French cartoon. They called him Goldorak, and I think the English translation is Grandizer. And then there was Mazinger, and Great Mazinger. And then like when we moved, I watched Transor Z, which was Mazinger. But that was like our introduction to anime. And then you were huge into Robotech, and used to like, I had a little TV in my bedroom when we were kids, and then you used to wake me up in the morning because Robotech was on at like the crack of dawn, and I was like, oh,
it was like 6 a.m.
Yeah. But I mean, you were always like kind of like into that anime manga stuff before I got into it. I was more like American comic books, Marvel and DC. and you were like sort of like really like sort of got into that all the manga and like
A little bit of it. Like I loved
yeah,
Lone Wolf. I thought Lone Wolf and Cub was super cool.
yeah,
What was there though, really in comic wise, it was Akira, Lone Wolf and Cub, and Ghost in the Shell, and I
right,
wasn't, there was good stuff, but I was unaware of it at the time. And some
right,
of the
right,
stuff with those, and they were like Akira was like the colored version that got colored over here, I think by Steve Oliff, and it's like it's just you look at it and you're like you don't even understand.
mm,
There's certain artists like I remember, like I was saying, Adam Hughes, Brian Boland, and
mm,
Otomo is another one of those guys where you're like I don't even understand. Like
yeah, the
how do you draw
perfection,
like that? It's impossible, And
yeah,
to this day, I still look at it and I don't really fully understand some of it. Like, how do
yeah,
you
yeah,
put that out? But yeah, that was a bit. Well, I mean, same thing. It's like you're the older brother, and I wouldn't be drawing comics or reading comics if you hadn't gotten into it first. I think, and
that's right.
maybe the thing, it's like you.
You owe me,
I'll have it on my tombstone one day,
you owe me big
but.
time.
But also like you got into I feel like you must have been into those Albator, which is like Captain Harlock
Yeah,
and all the Japanese animation, just because it was so far superior to any like American
yeah,
animation
yeah. Battle of the
there's
Planets also was another one.
like so
Yeah,
why because we didn't understand why is this animation so much better than this other stuff,
yeah, yeah. It's true.
and certain episodes of Transformers were really good, and it's like whatever,
Yeah,
like they
yeah.
would go to like
I still once in a while watch. I mean, Starstorm's influenced obviously by like
Mhm.
80s cartoons, and like I used to love I still watch the intros because they're obviously done by Japanese studios, and I was like,
like
the
the 18
animation is like amazing, for
yeah
Silverhawks and Thundercats, and like I used to watch what was it, Saber Rider, and all these great cartoons back then. And but the opening sequence, I wish like I remember thinking like I wish why is the animation not as stellar as like that opening section, you know what I mean? And
yeah
like until and then I got into Japanese anime, and I was like, oh, these cartoons are all like that opening sequence of those 80s cartoons, So
yeah
yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
That's yeah. I'll ask you back the same question about Starstorm. We should probably talk about our books at some point, but
right,
it's fun talking about the old stuff too.
yeah.
But what about you? What's your first things that were really like you said? You got John Byrne in there. Who else? You got in
Yeah,
this?
John Byrne. I mean, John Romita Jr. was a huge,
Yeah,
influence on, on my, not my art style, but I just loved his storytelling, and I mean, there's so many. It's like there's a list as long as longer than my arm. You know what I mean? Like there's
yeah,
so many great. I mean, Frank Miller, obviously. Was a big fan of Art Adams's art style back in the day, and he was a big influence. I mean, like Mobius. I mean, there's so many. John Byrne, George Perez, Neil Adams is like the first guy I remember like seeing like his style and like thinking, not knowing at the time who he was or how important he
yeah,
was to the industry, but like just thinking like that's the way comic books should be drawn. Not that I draw
yeah,
anywhere near as good as he does, but it's just like he's I think he was like the first guy that really came on and was like he had a great style, like where everybody, I mean, obviously Jack Kirby's like, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't really like Jack Kirby because the only thing I knew him like about him was that when he was on the Superpowers, and I was like, this I didn't think it looked good at all. I was like,
yeah,
the blocky anatomy with especially on the DC heroes, I couldn't stand it when I was a kid. I was like, oh, it's terrible, and everybody was like, oh, Jack Kirby's the best. And I was like, no, he's horrible. And then as I got older and really looked into what he created and what he did, and then how dynamic his storytelling was. Now he's like my favorite. So I mean,
yeah. In the same way though, I didn't like Alex Toth. To me, was boring when I first saw it. And I don't even have a good excuse for that because I wasn't even a kid when I saw Alex Toth. I was like in college or something. It took me a while to understand it. I hated Jack Kirby. I liked real guys that I thought were just like Brian Boland and Adam Hughes and people like that were so
yeah,
realistic. It comes from George Perez, I guess, just that line of things. I'm sure I would have loved Neil Adams if I had seen him back in
yeah,
the day.
yeah. And then
But it's
Todd
like I
McFarlane,
didn't get
obviously.
Kirby, I didn't get Toth, and I didn't get I don't remember, but I don't think I liked Mike Mignola. So it's
Mm,
like now those are some of my gods, you know? So it's like,
Yeah.
you don't get stuff right away. We're like 10, 11, 12, 13, you know?
Yeah.
So
It's the same
you
sort of
need,
thing like Tim Sale. I wasn't a big fan. I didn't
mm,
like his Batman's cowl and stuff, you know, and then like people would say, "Oh, Tim Sale is a great storyteller," and I was like, "What? His art's no good," you know. And then, but then I started like looking into it, and I was like, "Wow, he did some beautiful stuff," you know. Like his washes and stuff were really great, and his and then his storytelling's great, you know. So I mean, and
for
that's
sure.
that's what I try to do with Starstorm is I just try to tell it like a clear story, you know, and I'm still working at being a better storyteller and a better all around artist, but that's
Me
what I
too.
try to do is just tell a clear story, you know. So
Yeah. Always
yeah, and I
working
mean, there's so many. Wes Craig is a big inspiration to me,
on.
so I have to tip my hat to him.
Well, you got me started and I kept you going. So we
Yeah,
help each other out in that way. You know, when
yeah,
when I got in professionally, I think it was like, oh, all right, so that can happen. So that's maybe you started drawing a bit more. Maybe once that you got me into it, but maybe
yeah.
I was a bit more obsessive at a certain point about drawing,
Well, you
even when we're
definitely had the drive, and I was
yeah
sort of like a little bit like spinning my wheels for a time. And you had, I like, I remember we lived together downtown at one point, and like, I'd be going out to bars, and I'd come home, and you'd be at the drawing table. You'd be, till like 1, 2 in the morning sometimes,
yeah.
and
Yeah, I
and
was
then
always obsessed with it. I remember like sitting in our parents' basement, and The Wedge, this TV show, would come on that would play like alternative videos on like Much Music, which is like Canadian MTV, and that would be like the late night show they would play because like no one cared about those videos. It was old, like old '90s alternative stuff, and I'd just be drawing, and it's back in the day where you could just be hunched over your drawing board and you could just wake up the next day and be fine. Like you wouldn't
yeah,
have. Yeah,
you
I
fall
had a
asleep after.
back then, but I used to wash my hand under cold water afterwards because I'd just be drawing, like just like obsessively until my hand hurt, which is
Yeah,
not a good idea. But
yeah,
I still look back like fondly at how yeah, I was very into it.
yeah,
But yeah, eventually you saw it was a real thing, and we went to a lot of comic book conventions together, and we've experienced this whole the other side of comic books, the professional side of comic books together for
yeah.
it's been a long time now.
Well, it took me a while to realize the amount of dedication and hard work it takes. It's a ton of work, and you have to be dedicated, and you really have to get your butt in that chair and draw. And I'm a little, I realize I'm slightly maybe ADHD or so, but so I have a tough time getting into the chair. But that's the hardest part is just sitting your butt down and putting a pencil in your hand and get at it, And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll find a bunch of things to distract me, and then I'm like, okay, I got to get in this chair and just start drawing, And then once I do it, usually starts to flow pretty good. And but there was a time when I'd sit down and I'd draw, and I'd be like, no, I can't do this. It's no good. And then I would just give up, But then I said, well, if I want to do this, then I really have to, discipline myself to sit in this chair and just go at it, even if it isn't looking good. Just draw until it does look good, So or it looks
Yeah.
decent at least, So, but that's
Yeah.
that's one thing that. I saw you just the dedication, and it was like, okay, so I had even though you're my younger brother, was like, you taught me a valuable lesson is that, if you're going to do something, you gotta work at it. It's not, things don't just fall in your lap.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's not get so mushy. Let's change topics.
Let's get around to actually talking about our books.
Yeah. Okay.
Starstorm. I know, again, this is one of those weird things where I know the story. I've been there for the whole thing since the original T-shirt, but
Right.
the Starstorm T-shirt that we saw
Right.
back in the day. It's like, give us the spiel on what inspired Starstorm and what do you want to achieve with it, and the journey from getting it from an idea in your head into an actual printed comic now.
Right. Well, I mean, the story. Like when we were kids, we went to Hampton Beach, and I was huge into comic books. So we were there, and I think Dad, like it's a vague memory now, but Dad had won like a prize at like one of these arcades or something, I think, or it was like one of those bocce ball games or something. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, there was a T-shirt there, and it said Starstorm on it, and it had like these old '80s graphics. So I got the T-shirt. It had like it looked like Zaxxon, like these little cubes and stars and little laser blasts, and it was in like the form of a video game box on the T-shirt, and underneath said Starstorm. So I got that T-shirt and went home and created a Starstorm cosplay. So I take credit as being the original cosplayer. I started cosplay, and all you cosplayers owe me a debt of gratitude. But Starstorm was my character. I made a mask for him, and I had black pajama bottoms. I had yellow cuffs on the black pajama bottoms, and I wore boots, and I had like sweatbands.
I forgot about this part. When you mentioned the mask, though, I'm like, this is like raising a memory. I kind of remember the mask. It was like ninja mask, just kind of like cut out like that, a big mask, right?
Yeah. And if I didn't, and I think I lost the mask, and then I started pulling like the ninja thing where you pull a black T-shirt over your head, and you just leave like the, your eyes are out the collar, and you tie it behind your head. So I think at one point that was like Starstorm was like transitioning, into like his ultimate form, So yeah. So anyway, so that's how Starstorm first started, and then I started drawing him as a character, and then I just thought the name was cool when I was a kid. I always liked the alliteration, so it was like you can see that in the comic book, with the character with Grant Garrison, and these different characters have alliterative names. But anyway, so that's how it started, and then. So I started drawing him, and then at one point you started using Starstorm in the comic books that you were doing. I usually just did a couple comic book pages here and there, but mostly what I do is character sketches and their bios and stuff like that. And then you were always doing like sequential stories. Stories.
A bit more. We would both do pinups, but I did a bit more stories back in the day.
Yeah, I was more doing like.
Out and find them. I'm sure I still have them. I beat the crap out of Starstorm. It was like I was Starstorm when you lent them to me, basically.
Right.
I got the crap beaten out of me, and I did some weird stuff. And then it was like at one point, I think you were like, "I want Starstorm back."
Yeah, I was. I was like, "What are you doing, dude? That's my character. I want him back." I'm the one with the costume, not you.
And then, I had my super group, my group I called the Vanguard.
Vanguard, yeah.
And you'd had Starstorm. These are our
and I might steal the Vanguard from you to put them in Starstorm, maybe.
I think you got enough superheroes in that book.
Yeah, I think so.
Why not add a few more to your? You draw like 100 characters on a double page spread. Why not have 100?
Yeah, I might. But the Vanguard was cool. Vanguard was a comic that Wes created when you were like what? 6?
Really early. Yeah, one of them was a character for like that I straight up copied from a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the original Eastman Laird thing. I just showed you that recently. Like the melting pot was like a thing they were working on, and I just ripped that character off. And it's all rip off characters when you're a kid. Actually, Starstorm is kind of your own thing. I don't think of it as being based on anybody else. But like, I had the main dude was a Canadian dude, and one character was a rip off of what's his name? Who's the crazy robotic character from New Mutants? Not Warlock. Is it Warlock?
Yeah, Warlock. Yeah,
like the black and white. Yeah. I did this guy that was based off of that because I just thought that was so cool looking. Same thing, like looking at your old Art Adams X-Men Asgard stuff. I was just like, whoa, I want to make a character that looks like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one thing. I like doing that. I did quite a few comics with those guys, but eventually I fell into the Vertigo-ish, college-y, like, oh, I got to do stuff that's more serious and, like that kind of thing. So, and then came back around to like superheroes and fantasy and all that stuff.
Well, one thing I always loved was when we were like teenagers, me and Wes were both into rockabilly. We were both into rockabilly, right? So, and we had like a little clique of guys who all dressed with leather jackets and greasy hair and stuff. So Wes did a comic of us as like, well, it was like loosely based on our group of friends, right? And it was, I was thinking one day we could do something with that. Maybe you should do something with that, like a little, like a six issue, sort of deal, or like a mini series. But I don't know.
I've got a bunch of old stuff. I got this old Viking story that I did. I told you this story called The Common Thread that I think I blew your mind way back in the day when I was trying to do my own comic books. And I did that Greaser comic was called JD, like Juvenile Delinquents. And Yeah, no, one day I'd like to kind of just show all that just because it's years of work and it's all
Mm.
amateur stuff, but it's fun, it's like a lot of like enthusiasm on those old pages
It's
and
still
stuff. So yeah,
cool though.
maybe
It's still like
one
I
day I'd
you
like
know
to show it.
yeah
Yeah, the Viking
yeah
story especially, that was my first time trying to write a finite, like beginning, middle, ending story. But anyway, that's in the past. But
yeah
back to Starstorm though. So
yeah.
you continue with how it progressed from the T-shirt to the cosplay to the
Right. Yeah. So, well, I just at one point I was sending away sample pages to Marvel and DC and different companies, and so they were sending me sample scripts back, and I was working on the sample scripts, but I wasn't getting any work. So I kind of got fed up a little bit, and I just said, you know what, I just want to really draw and write my own thing, my own stories. So I said, I'm just going to do my own thing and then self-publish and do the Eastman and Laird thing. They were a huge influence on me as well. We had friends. I mean, remember our friends when we were kids had those Ninja Turtle comic books, and I was like the original Ninja Turtle comic books, and it was like, that was awesome. So those guys were a huge inspiration for Starstorm, and I still will watch the. I think it's called Turtle Power. It's about like the making of the Ninja Turtles, and talks with both those guys about how they did it. And Mirage Studios was always something like when I got Starstorm originally when I was getting it going. I wanted to make have my buddies from high school make comic books with them. I tried getting that together, but it never ended up going anywhere. So I just said I'm just going to do this myself, and then whatever happens with it, happens. If I self publish and do it that way, or if I find a publisher, then that would be great. That would be better, So yeah, so I just said, yeah, I'm just going to do that, and I'm just going to have fun with it and draw what I want, and make a fun story, and then yeah, and that's how it evolved. And I just was working on that, and just doing little things on the side, other writing stories, other stories on the side, and I put it down for a bit, and then COVID hit. And then I said, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, then now's the time, because I got, who knows how long to sit at home. And,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I might as well just work, put my butt to the grindstone and get this done. So then I got it done. And then you were already, in, like doing your thing, and, people were loving your stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I have a younger brother I can bully into helping me out. Get me in front of those dudes. So, yeah. Anyways, so right. So I just
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that's what it was. It was just like I just said, you know what? I'm just going to do my own thing. That's all I ever really wanted to do anyway. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd like to do a Batman story, do an X-Men story, do a Spider-Man story, Superman story, all that stuff for sure. But and I have ideas for that if that ever happens. But if I just end up doing Starstorm and getting Starstorm out of my head and onto the page, and I have quite a few stories coming up, and I think they're. I mean, it starts off slow, and then it kind of like it really jumps like leaps and bounds as soon as it gets to the end of the first arc, and then it's gonna really start flying from there. So it's. I mean, I think it's just stuff I do for myself. Really, it's like something I would have liked reading growing up, So
Yeah.
and I'm just trying to, I'm just having fun with it, and that's it. So.
Yeah.
What about Kaya?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like tying into that, it's a little bit like I did a bit of work for DC and Marvel, but also what I wanted to do, what you is something similar to what you saw growing up. I wanted to have some big long run on a favorite character, and do something like Walter Simonson's Thor, like my version of that or whatever. And if you're waiting and you're sending in samples, or you're just waiting for Marvel or DC or whoever to give you the keys and say, go do your favorite thing, it's like maybe you'll get there, but maybe you'll be waiting forever. So it's a little bit like, do the thing that makes you happy, do the thing that you want to do. And that was part of it for me with Kaya was, like being raised on creator owned was a thing. It was exciting. It's like something that I always wanted to work on some of these characters, but I also, most of the comics that I did, like we were saying, growing up, it wasn't like my version of the Hulk or me drawing a Spider-Man adventure. It was always me and I didn't even think to do that in a weird way, because all the stuff that I do when I was a kid, it was like I do pinups of those characters, but then when I did actual stories, it was always just my own ideas.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit like the grand goal was, or I don't know if it's the goal, but I mean, just like the my perfect working situation would just be writing and drawing my own thing. You know,
Yeah.
like that was always kind of getting there and trying to get there. And I pitched a very different version of Kaya to Image many years ago. And it was the world of Kaya, but Kaya wasn't a character yet. It was with these gods that were basically like kind of my versions of like, not the Marvel version, but the traditional Viking. Like there was like an Odin, a Loki, and a Thor kind of characters, and they were all rivaling with each other. But there was no Kaya. But the world was a bit of a mashup of a sci-fi and fantasy kind of brought together. And I would pitch different things to them, and I'd get rejected. The drawing was okay, but the story just wasn't quite there yet. I didn't, it takes a while to get those chops up to the point of being professional. And yeah, I think one big thing was I was working DC and Marvel, just doing journeyman stuff for them. And then I got a call from Rick Remender to do Deadly Class, and we did that for like 9-10 years. That built up that was the first time where I ever had like a fan following that liked my stuff for one particular thing. And right afterwards, I could have taken a little bit of a break, but I was like, right after this, I want to just finally do this thing that I've been working on for years and years, and write and draw my own thing. And hopefully enough people pick it up that I can just do that for the foreseeable future. And it's the same, very different worlds our two characters live in, but it's like, a lot of it is, there's a lot of the similarities come from we're just putting all our favorite stuff in there, like,
Yeah.
putting all our influences in through our own lens. So it's not some kind of straight copy of anything, but it's just like we're doing our own versions of all the stuff that we love and the stuff we love to draw and that kind of thing. It's like, I feel like Eric Larson did that with Savage Dragon, and Mike Mignola did that with Hellboy, and we're doing that. We're doing all our favorite stuff.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? Is like the original Image guys, like, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the goal is to, I know both of us, we have the daunting thing in this day and age where it's like, we're not doing just some little mini series. We want to just be able to do this as ongoing series and just kind of keep rolling with it as long as we can, as long as people are around and as long as it pays the bills, we're both very happy doing this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, my goal too is that, like, sorry, what's that?
Just hopefully we get that chance,
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, like I was just thinking, like I was saying, like just when I was in high school, getting so excited to go to the comic book store when like the new comic books came out, and like, if I can do that for some other kid who's in high school, who's, what I mean, who's like just excited for Starstorm to come out, if I can do that for, 5-10 people even, that's great. That's amazing. I gave them the stoke that I had, and that's really like what the goal is, like, that I can do for them what those comic books at that time did for me, so that's what I'm hoping Starstorm is, well, I'm hoping it's for more than 5-10 people because I won't be able to keep doing it if it is. But I mean, that's my hope, is that people like, get a buzz out of it and enjoy it, and it brightens up their day. If their day is a little bit dreary and they get home and they got a comic book and they read it and it just brings a smile to their face. And they, I mean, the comic book that I read that was like that was Invincible last year. I read it last year. And I mean, it gave me that same buzz, like as when I was a kid, I was like reading it and I was like, man, this comic is like, at first for me, it started out slow, and I sort of equated to Starstorm. Starstorm kind of maybe starts a little slow for some people, but it picks up quick. And then when it does, you're like on for a ride, and you just can't put it down. You just want to keep reading it, that's my,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah,
I just reread my first trade paperback of Kaya, not for egotistical reasons, just because I'm trying to figure out the next few arcs, and I'm like, so I need to make sure, tons of it is in your head, and you're like, what's in my head and what I've actually written on the page that people have read that is now like the canon of the story, where I got to make sure it's all straight in my head.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, this, there are certain parts. It's so hard reading your own stuff, and because you can't enjoy the good stuff. You just look at the things that didn't work and you're like, oh man, it drives you crazy. But it just, hopefully it's motivation to just trying to keep getting better.
Yeah.
But I think it's the first few issues is tough for any series because you're trying to set up this origin but also get the action going and get people invested in the characters. You're trying to do a lot of stuff all in one comic or two comic. The first few comics, you got to like hook them hard, So
Yeah.
it's difficult to do that. And also, just the more you write, just the better you get. You start shedding some novice writing stuff, and you start understanding what people are gonna like. What am I really engaging with in the story, and what am I just doing exposition that like no one cares about? Because I think this world is like. At first, I did a lot of stuff where I explained secondary characters way more than anybody could ever care about them, And my wife, Lexi, was just like, no one's going to really care about this stuff, like you have to care about the first few characters like Kaya and Jin, and then eventually you can like lead on to these other people.
Right.
That was, it's like it should have been obvious to me, but it wasn't. But
Yeah.
big huge world in your head, you think it's so cool, and you want to tell everybody every single detail that you figured out, but they won't necessarily care.
I have a tough time with that too.
You want to stick everything in there, but it's like, but if people don't care about what's happening first and foremost, they're not going to care about all these little details that you're putting in there. Well, just there's all these little. It's just same as the art though. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. It's like I'm trying to just get better at each page. Same thing. It's like I'm looking at the writing and I'm picking things apart, and I'm also looking at the art. And it's like I've been doing this for forever. Like that hand looks super weird. Like it drives me crazy. I'm like, that eye is wrong, or well, you never really, on a deadline thing, you can't make the drawings perfect. You just try to do the best job that you can, but it's got to get out when it's got to get out.
Yeah. So. Well, you know how I am. I'd go and redraw everything I've ever drawn. So, it's like, sometimes you just got to go, okay, that's as good as it's going to get for today. And like, let's just get it done, So
yeah. Going back only when it's necessary for me is a little bit like, I almost have to do it that way. Cause I can't, if I keep looking back at previous issues, it's almost like, it's so weird. Cause I'm sure like non-comic creators listen to this and they go, what are they talking about? But it's like but what makes me feel good is I know that even the people that I think are perfect feel the same way about their stuff. So it's like there's no artist or writer or whatever that doesn't look back and cringe at previous work, and that's just how it is. You just kind of got to keep moving forward.
I saw like a quote from one of the Kubert brothers. They wrote on like their Instagram or something. It was like, perfection is the downfall of, I don't know. It's like basically saying that like nothing's perfect. So like just get it as good as you can get it and then get it out. You know what I mean? Because if you just sit there trying to make it perfect, it's never going to get done, So it was, it was a good quote, and it was more eloquent than I just put it. But that's basically the gist of it,
It's like these guys that have had. It's funny because I was going to say something similar for like John Romita Jr., where it's like they both have these legendary fathers that taught them about the game like early on, and it's like he's always referred to his style as like a deadline style. Like, oh yeah, like you're making these characters, these worlds, everything else. You could just keep noodling away, but you have a style. This is the best version of your style that can get done. A page a day, or whatever whatever you're doing. However how tight your deadlines are. And I was like, it's like I could just noodle away and make something crazy looking, but it's like you can do that for an illustration once in a while. But if you do that for a deadline driven monthly comic, first of all, you're going to kill yourself because you'll never leave your chair. And secondly, just tell the story. That's the important thing too. You don't have to just impress with every single panel. You just need to tell a good story and engage people that way, What else we got to say?
I don't know. We cover everything.
Well, we've done our spiel on our books. I think we could just go on and on about all these topics, but at the same time, like we're going an hour here. I think that's people have probably heard enough of our
okay.
So what do I have to say? Kaya is out monthly. Starstorm, the Savage Strength of Starstorm is out monthly, both from Image Comic Books. Kaya, I write and draw. Drew writes and draws Starstorm, and
the Savage Strength of Starstorm.
Yeah, the Savage Strength of Starstorm. The awesome name. When he told me that, I was like, that's even better. Because it's like you're really having fun with it,
Yeah.
When it turned from Starstorm to that. But yeah, those are both out every month from Image, and you and me are working hard on it. And I don't know about you, but right after this is over,
back to work.
Drawing another page. Yeah.
Yep. That's what we're doing.
Should we hang it up?
All right. The conversation continues offline.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wes and Drew, for this incredible episode. Savage Strength of Starstorm number 3 is on sale now, and Kaya number 9 goes on sale on August 9th at your local comic shop or wherever comics are sold online. And as always, thank you so much for listening. If you have a moment, please rate and review this show or share it with a friend. And we'll see you next time on Dynamic Duos.